She found me on the third day of the storm. I know it was the third day because I had been counting. Not with marks on the wall, there was no wall anymore, only the collapsed husk of the loading shelter at Sector 9, the rusted corrugated panels that had folded like paper when the thermal shockwave rolled through the lower district. I had been counting by the way the light changed through the gap between two sheets of metal. Gray to black, black to gray, gray to black again. 3 cycles, 3 days. I was 9 years old, and I had decided, somewhere in the middle of the second black, that I was probably going to die. Not with panic, not with tears. I had used all my tears in the first few hours, screaming for my mother until my throat turned to sandpaper and no one came. By the third day it was just a quiet fact, the way hunger is a quiet fact after long enough. The body moves past the screaming part and into something still and watchful, like an animal that has decided to conserve what is left. My name is Vreth Bloodfang, of the Keth Vrethna clan of the Orc city world Gorund Prime, and I am the only member of my family who is still alive to tell you what happened next. His name was Sergeant Marcus Cole, though I did not know that for a long time. For most of that first day I only knew him as the sound of boots on metal, and then a light, sharp and white, not the dull amber of Gorund utility lamps, and then a face peering through the gap, a face that was the strangest thing I had ever seen. Soft, that was my first thought. He looked soft. I had grown up surrounded by orcs. The faces I knew were broad and heavy-boned, with jutting lower jaws and thick ridges above the eyes, skin in shades of deep green and gray-brown, tusks ranging from vestigial nubbins in children to the long curving ivory of elder warriors. My mother had tusks that she kept polished. My uncle Kethvar had tusks that he had carved symbols into, clan marks that wound from base to tip. This creature had none of that. His face was narrow and flat, with a small chin and a small nose and eyes. This was the strangest part, eyes that were light asterisk. I had never seen light eyes before. In the beam of his torch they looked like the shallow end of the hydroponics ponds, a pale brownish green that did not belong to any creature I had catalogued. He said something. I did not understand it. He said something again, and this time I understood one word. A word from the common trade tongue, hurt, spoken as a question, and accompanied by a gesture toward my body. I looked down at myself. I had a gash on my left forearm from the metal when the shelter collapsed. It had stopped bleeding 2 days ago and had crusted over in a way that made me feel sick to look at. My left knee was swollen where I had fallen. I was wearing my school uniform, a gray thermal wrap with the Keth Vrethna clan mark embroidered on the shoulder, and it was soaked through with 3 days of sweat and grime. Hurt asterisk, he had asked. I said in the trade tongue, yes. He reached his hand through the gap. I looked at that hand for a long time. It was pale, almost disturbingly so, and the fingers were long and thin compared to what I was used to, without the thick knuckle pads that orc hands have. There were short hairs on the back of it. It was, I thought, an extraordinarily delicate-looking hand for something that called itself a soldier. I had been taught, all my life, to be afraid of humans. Not in a formal way. My mother was not the kind of parent who sat you down and delivered speeches about race. It was more ambient than that, the way the news showed human military vessels, and the adults in the room went quiet, the way the phrase *human interest in a contract negotiation made Keth elders suck air through their teeth. Humans were the species that had arrived in this sector 40 years ago with technology and ambitions, who had positioned themselves as trade partners and slowly, methodically, become something more complicated. They were not enemies exactly, but they were not safe. I took his hand. His name was Marcus. He established this about an hour later when we were out of the rubble and into the portable shelter he had set up in the street. A remarkable structure, the human emergency shelter, rigid enough to stand in and warm enough that my shivering stopped within minutes, inflating from a pack about the size of a large rucksack into something that could sleep 4. He pointed to his chest and said Marcus asterisk, and then pointed at me. Vreth, I said. Vreth Bloodfang. He repeated it carefully. Vreth. He got the consonants right on the first try, which surprised me. Most non-orcs butchered the hard sounds in our language. The glottal stop before the asterisk th asterisk, the way the vowel sat at the back of the throat. He said it the way it was supposed to be said. I asked him in my halting trade tongue. I had only 3 years of school trade tongue classes, barely conversational, where the others were. The relief teams, the city emergency services. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, working in the upper sectors, they do not know anyone is down here. I stared at him. I do not know how to say this with gentleness, he continued, speaking slowly, choosing words I could follow, so I will say it plainly. The storm took most of the lower district. The Keth Emergency Bureau believes the lower 9 sectors evacuated before the shockwave. They are focused north. I am searching south because my orders were to do a sweep, and I do not know how to do anything halfway. He said the last part with something in his face that I did not yet have words for. Later I would learn that it was what humans called asterisk sheepishness, a kind of self-deprecating admission that a personality trait was both a flaw and a point of pride simultaneously. At the time, I just thought he looked a little embarrassed to be following orders properly when everyone else had moved on. How many others are down here? I asked. I don't know yet, he said. You are the first living person I have found. Living person. There it was. I had known, I think. I had known since the second Black to Gray that if there were other survivors nearby, they would have come toward the sound of my screaming or at least called back. The lower district of Sector 9 was not a wealthy neighborhood. Most of the residents were workers in the transit hubs, and most of them worked the morning shift, and the storm had hit at morning shift departure time. I did not cry. I had no more crying left. Marcus watched my face and seemed to understand what was happening in it, because he did not say anything. He moved to the small kit at the corner of the shelter and came back with medical supplies, a cleaning agent and a closure strip for my arm, a cold pack for my knee, and he treated my injuries with a matter-of-fact gentleness that reminded me, sharply and painfully, of my mother. She had hands like that, not gentle in the soft way, not fussy or hovering, just asterisk correct asterisk. She knew where to press and where not to press, and she did the thing that needed doing without ceremony. I let him work. I watched his face while he worked. Why are you here? I asked. Not on Gorand Prime, on this world in this sector doing this sweep. You are a soldier. This is not a war. It is not a war, he agreed. My unit was stationed here for the joint engineering project, the new transit hub in Sector 4. We were doing infrastructure surveys when the storm hit. He smoothed the closure strip on my arm and sat back on his heels. When the storm hit and communications went down, my sergeant major ordered us to hold position at the northern muster point and wait for the storm to pass. I held position for about 40 minutes and then I told him I was going south. Did he give you permission? Marcus made a sound that I later learned was a very human thing called a asterisk wry exhale. He did not. So you are in trouble. Probably, he said. It has happened before. He gave me water and a ration bar, human food, strange and sweet salt, not at all like orc rations but edible enough, and then he took out a battered data tablet and asked me questions. Not about what I had survived, not about my injuries. He asked me about the district, who lived here, which buildings had basement structures, where the subtunnels ran. He was mapping. He was building a search grid. He was not here to rescue one child and go home. The night of the first day, after the others had stopped coming and the relief workers had logged us into their systems and gone back to their organized operations in the upper sectors, Marcus made something he called asterisk field coffee from a sealed packet in his kit. It was human food, which meant it was not calibrated for orc biology, but he offered it anyway, and I took it because the smell was extraordinary, dark and rich, and somehow both sharp and warm at once, nothing like the root tea I had grown up with. I held the cup and didn't drink it, just held it for the heat. "You can talk," he said, "or not talk, either is fine." I looked at him across the small folded camp table. "Don't humans need noise?" He considered this. "Some do, depends on the person." "What about you?" "I spent 3 years on long survey postings where the communication blackout was 90 days at a stretch," he said. "You learn to be okay with quiet." "That sounds terrible." "Some parts," he said. "The geology was interesting." I looked at the cup. "What is your home world like?" "Earth," he leaned back in the camp seat. "Loud, crowded, complicated. I don't spend a lot of time there anymore." He thought about it. "Blue skies, real blue, not the haze blue you get on a lot of colony worlds. And oceans, I don't know if you have oceans on the worlds you've seen, but Earth has big ones, real open water that goes further than you can see from the shore." "Gorand Prime has no oceans," I said. "Transit hub world, mostly city." "I know, the survey data shows," he paused. "Sorry, you didn't ask for a geological assessment." "No," I said. "Tell me about the oceans." So he did. He spoke about the oceans the way someone speaks of a thing they have known since before memory, not with performance but with the particular ease of something that has become part of the architecture of who you are. "The sound of it," he said. "The sound more than the sight. The relentlessness of it, the way it never stopped moving." I had grown up on a transit hub world. My entire life had been the sound of ship engines and loading platforms and the compressed bustle of a city that existed entirely to move things from one place to another. I had never heard an ocean. I thought about that while he talked. I thought about the idea of a sound that never stopped. "Marcus," I said when he paused. "Vreth." "My mother," I stopped, tried again. "My mother used to say that the worst thing about grief is that it feels like it is taking something from you. That every day you lose a piece of it. But she said the other way to think of it is that you are not losing the feeling, you are carrying it further from the moment, and it gets lighter because you are stronger, not because it is smaller." He was very still. "I don't know yet which one is true," I said. "I am too close to the moment." "You don't have to know yet," he said. "I know." I looked at the coffee cup which I still had not drunk from. I just wanted to say it out loud, to practice. "You can say it as many times as you need to," he said. "I'm not going anywhere tonight." I finally drank the coffee. It was bitter and too hot and completely wrong for my biology, and I drank all of it. And when I set the empty cup down, I felt, for the first time since the storm, something that was not quite warmth but was adjacent to it. We found Krentha under the transit hub on Sector 9B. She was older than me, maybe 12. With a broken collarbone she had been cradling for 3 days, and when we pulled the panel off the entrance and she saw Marcus, she screamed. I stepped in front of him before he could move. "He is the one who found me," I said in full Orcish. "He is not," I paused, searching for the right word, "not an enemy felt too large, not going to hurt you felt too small. He is good," I said finally. "He does the right thing, even when no one is watching." Krentha stared at me. Then she stared at Marcus, who was waiting with patience that I was beginning to understand was characteristic of him, not situational. "He is not going to touch me," Krentha said. "He doesn't need to," I said. "Tell me how to do what he tells me, and I will do it." It took 40 minutes to get Krentha out safely, with Marcus directing and me executing, and at the end of it she sat in the emergency shelter with her arm in a sling that Marcus had fashioned from his own pack straps. He had given her the medical kit's proper sling, but it was too small for orc proportions, and the improvised version he made from pack straps was better, and she watched him with the eyes of someone who has not yet decided what category to put a thing in. We found 2 more that afternoon. An elderly male named Vog, a transit hub operator who had sheltered in his control booth and was physically unharmed but very disoriented, speaking only in an old dialect I could barely follow. And a young mother, Dressa, who had her infant son Breck with her, both of them in a sealed supply closet that had somehow maintained structural integrity when the building around it did not. 5 survivors in Sector 9. 5 living people in a neighborhood that had housed 400. Marcus contacted his unit's emergency frequency that evening. I listened to the conversation without understanding most of the human language, but I understood the tone. He was reporting what he had found, and someone on the other end was not happy about the deviation from orders, and Marcus was calmly, methodically, not apologizing for it. After he signed off, I asked him if he was going to be disciplined. "Possibly," he said. "Because you found us. Because I left my post without authorization. The finding you part is not the problem." I thought about this. "That seems like a badly designed system," I said. He looked at me with the light eyes, and for the first time something in his face moved in a way that wasn't professional, something warmer and more personal. "Yeah," he said, "it does." The relief teams arrived the following morning. There was a complicated period of handovers and documentation and medical assessments, and at one point, a senior Orc official from the Keth Emergency Bureau came and spent a long time talking with Marcus in the trade tongue, with an interpreter helping with the technical vocabulary, and the official's expression cycled through several stages that I recognized as versions of *embarrassed and *grateful and *defensive about being embarrassed. Krentha's family came for her. Vogue was taken to a medical unit. Dressa and Breck were escorted to a family registration point. I sat on my own, wrapped in the thermal layer Marcus had given me. I had not given it back, and he had not asked for it, and I watched the district fill slowly with people who had come too late. A bureau representative came to speak with me. She was very professional and very kind in the bureaucratic sense, meaning she said all the correct words in the correct order. She confirmed what I already knew. My mother, Sethna Bloodfang, and my uncle Kethvar, and my 2 cousins who lived on our block, had not been found. She gave me a reference number. She told me someone from Clan Keth Social Services would come to take me to a transitional center. I said, "All right." She left. I said. Marcus appeared from somewhere. I had not been tracking him for a while. He had been very busy and crouched down so his face was level with mine, the way he had been doing since the first day, never standing over me, always coming down to where I was. I had noticed this. I had noticed that he did it with all of us, all 5 survivors, regardless of what Orc etiquette suggested about the proper physical positioning between adults. "Someone is coming for you," he asked. "The clan social services," I said, "to take me to a transitional center." He looked at my face. "When?" She did not say exactly. He looked around at the organized chaos of the rescue operation, at the bureau representatives and the documentation teams and the medical responders, all of them moving with purpose in 100 different directions. Then he said, "I'll stay until they come." I looked at him. "I don't have anywhere I urgently need to be," he said, in a tone that suggested this was not entirely true, but that he had decided to make it true. "You are already in trouble," I said, "for leaving your post. Then a little more time isn't going to change much." I looked at my hands, small hands for an Orc. My mother used to say I had my grandmother's hands, fine-boned and good for small detailed work. She said it as a compliment. She had wanted me to be a maker of things. "Will you do something for me?" I asked. "If I can," he said. I looked up at him. "Don't tell anyone my mother is dead. Not yet, not." I stopped. I tried to find the words in the trade tongue for what I meant and couldn't locate them. If I say it out loud, it becomes the only thing that is true. I am not ready for that to be the only thing that is true yet. He was quiet for a long moment. Okay, he said. I won't say anything. Promise. I promise. I went back to looking at my hands. After a moment, he sat down on the rubble beside me, not crouching anymore, just sitting, in the debris of a district that used to be a neighborhood, and he didn't say anything else, and neither did I, and somehow that was exactly right. The clan's social services representative did not come that day. She came 3 days later. By that time, Marcus and I had developed something that I did not have a name for, and that he probably would have called, in the self-deprecating way he had, a situation asterisk. It started because I knew the district and he didn't. The official search teams were pulling back to prioritize the living over the task of recovery, but Marcus was not pulling back, and I told him where the hidden spaces were, the places that flooding used to fill in the rainy season, which were dug out and reinforced and used as storage. The subtunnels that maintenance workers used to move between hubs without crossing the streets. The old root cellars under the buildings that had been there since before the transit expansion. We found 3 more survivors. An older adolescent, Peck, who had been in the subtunnel system when the storm hit and had been moving through them for 4 days trying to find a way out. 2 workers from an overnight shift who had sheltered in one of the old root cellars and had food and water but no way to signal. 6 total. 6 people who would not have been found by the official search, which had closed the sector. Marcus reported each one through proper channels with the full documentation, and each time the response from his unit got slightly more complicated, and each time he said, calmly, that he understood and would check in again when there was more to report. At night in the portable shelter he taught me words. His language, standard Terran, the tongue spoken across the human worlds, while I ate the rations that were not quite right but that I had stopped noticing were not quite right. He was a good teacher. He did not treat it like a lesson. He pointed at things and said the words and waited for me to repeat them, and when I got them wrong, he did not correct me with impatience, only said it again a different way. Shelter warm, safe, found. I taught him Orcish words in return, though mine were more advanced than his because I was 9 and language came easily at 9. On the second night, in the dark of the shelter with the storm still cycling outside in diminished but unpredictable gusts, he asked me what my mother was like. I thought about it for a long time. She fixed things, I said, not professionally. She worked in transit logistics, but at home she fixed things. If something broke, she opened it up and looked at it until she understood it, and then she fixed it. She said the best thing you could know about any broken thing was that it had worked once, which meant it could work again. Marcus was quiet. She said that about people too, I added. Not broken in a sad way, she just meant, if you understood how someone worked, you could help them work again. She sounds like someone who paid attention, Marcus said. She paid attention to everything. I pulled the thermal layer tighter. She would have paid attention to you. She would have figured you out very quickly. Should I be worried about that? Probably, I said, and he made the wry exhale sound, and somehow I was smiling, which I had not expected to be doing. The social services representative, when she finally came, was a harried middle-aged woman named Rel, who had been processing 200 cases since the storm, and who looked at me with tired kindness and genuine sorrow, and a clipboard that she kept consulting for my reference number. Marcus was there. He had been present for the meeting at my request, though I had not been able to explain exactly why. Rel explained my situation with the careful gentleness of someone who had explained it many times. I was a sole surviving clan minor. Keth Vrethna clan protocols gave custodial authority to the nearest available blood relative, of which I had none in this system. My father's family was on Goran Secundus, 2 transit weeks away, and establishing contact and transfer would take time. In the interim, I would go to a transitional center, which she described in terms that suggested it was adequate, and which something in her expression suggested was adequate and nothing more. How long, I asked. Contact attempts have already been initiated with your father's clan. It may be several weeks. It may be longer." She looked at the clipboard. "Bloodfang is not a small clan on Secondus. There will be family members willing to—" "I don't know any of them," I said. Rel looked at me over the clipboard with her tired eyes and didn't say anything, because there was nothing useful to say to that. I looked at Marcus. He looked at me. I had not planned what happened next. I had been raised by a woman who fixed things by opening them up and understanding them, and I had learned from her to be methodical and patient, and this was neither methodical nor patient. It was the kind of thing that happens when you are 9 years old and have lost everything, and the one person who has been present and steady and correct in the way of someone who does the right thing even when no one is watching is standing 3 meters away and about to leave. "Can he come?" I asked Rel. Rel blinked. "I beg your pardon." "To the transitional center, can he come?" "He, the human soldier. He is not, that's not." Rel consulted her clipboard as if it might contain guidance on this unprecedented development. "He is not a family member or a registered." "He found me," I said. "He promised he wouldn't." I stopped. The promise was private. It was the wrong thing to put into this conversation. "He is the only person I know who is not dead," I said instead, which was true. There was a silence. Marcus spoke carefully. "I don't think that is the practical solution to the situation," he said. He spoke to me directly, not around me, which I had come to understand was his consistent habit. "The transitional center has staff who are trained for exactly this. I am not trained for this." "You found me under 3 meters of rubble on the 3rd day," I said. "You found 6 people the official search missed. You have been here every day." "That was the job in front of me," he said, which was the most Marcus Cole sentence I had ever heard. "Then let this be the job in front of you." Another silence, longer this time. Rel was looking between us with the expression of someone watching an event she was not sure how to categorize. "I can't stay on Gorund Prime indefinitely," Marcus said. "I have a unit. I have obligations. I have a sergeant major who already thinks I have loose morals with regard to orders." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking for indefinitely." "What are you asking for?" I thought about it. I was 9 and I had lost everything, and I was not going to pretend I was capable of precision in this moment. I said the true thing, which was, "I don't know. I just don't want you to leave yet." He looked at me for a long time with those light eyes that I had been looking at for 5 days now, and that I had learned to read. A little, the way you learn to read a sky that is clouded over. You learn the small signals instead of the obvious ones. Then he turned to Rel. "What would I need to do," he said, "to be listed as a registered contact for this child?" It was, as these things tend to be, more complicated than a single question. Marcus's sergeant major, a man named Vance who I eventually met, and who turned out to be far more reasonable than Marcus's oblique references to him had suggested, was contacted through official channels by the Keth Emergency Bureau, and asked to release one Sergeant Marcus Cole for an extended humanitarian assistance role in the Sector 9 recovery zone. The Bureau, it turned out, wanted Marcus's survey skills and his apparent ability to locate survivors in collapsed structures, and was willing to make the formal request through military protocols to get them. Vance apparently said, with the particular exhaustion of someone who had predicted this exact outcome, "Fine, but I want monthly reports." The transitional center was, as Rel's careful words had suggested, adequate. I had a room, which I shared with 3 other girls, 2 of them orc, one of them a small blue-skinned species called Veth that I had never encountered before, and there were meals and a school program and social workers who rotated through and asked me how I was feeling in the way that made it clear they were asking the official question rather than the real one. Marcus came every 3 days, sometimes more. He brought things. A data reader loaded with educational materials in both Orcish and Standard Terran, a small carved figure of an animal from his home world that he said was called a asterisk bear, and which looked nothing like any animal I had ever seen, a packet of nuts that were from his home planet, and that tasted extraordinary, sweet, sharp, and rich in a way that made me close my eyes the first time I ate one. He brought himself, which was the main thing. We would sit in the common room of the center or, on good weather days, in the courtyard, and he would update me on the survey work, and I would tell him about school, and we would teach each other words. And sometimes we wouldn't talk at all, just sit with the kind of comfortable silence that I had not thought could exist between two such different people. He came on the first visit with the data reader and the carved bear and the packet of nuts, and he came on the second visit with a paper notebook, gray cover, pocket-sized, and instructions to write, and he came on the third visit with a kind of careful attentiveness that I had begun to recognize as the way he operated in unfamiliar territory. Not performing comfort, not filling silence with false reassurance, just watching the situation until he understood what it needed. What it needed, I was learning, was not what I would have expected. I had thought in the first weeks that what I needed was information, to know where I was going, what the plan was, how long things would take. I was my mother's daughter, and my mother was a logistics woman. She understood the world through chains of cause and effect, through schedules and dependencies, and she had raised me the same way. I believed in plans. I believed in knowing. But the transitional center ran on its own timeline, which was administrative rather than human or orc, and information arrived in pieces, often contradictory, often subject to revision. What I was learning was that plans were less useful than orientation, not what will happen but which direction is forward. Marcus was the direction. Not because he fixed anything, he could not fix the waiting, could not accelerate the contact to Secondus, could not change the fact that my mother was gone and my uncle and my cousins and everyone else on my block. But he was a fixed point in a landscape that had no other fixed points, and fixed points, I was discovering, were what you navigated by when you could not see the destination. He brought books, not the data reader kind, actual paper books, translations of works from his home world, chosen with what I later understood was considerable care. Not children's books, which would have been condescending, and not adult books with no connection to my situation, but things that lived in the middle, stories about people finding their way through changed circumstances, about unexpected alliances and strange kinds of belonging. I read them all. I returned them with small notes written in Standard Terran on slips of paper left at the appropriate pages. This part is true asterisk, or this is wrong about grief asterisk, or once, simply I read this 3 times asterisk. He read my notes. He told me so on the next visit, and he cited which ones had surprised him. And then we had a conversation about the one that had said asterisk. This is wrong about grief, that lasted 2 hours, and covered more ground than anything I had encountered in the social worker sessions that were supposed to be helping me process. The book says grief gets easier with time, I told him. My mother said it gets lighter because you get stronger. These are not the same thing. They're not, he agreed. One is about the grief changing, the other is about you changing. Which do you believe? I thought about it. I think my mother was right, and I think she was right because she had actually been through it. She lost her brother when she was young. She never said that it got easier, only that she got bigger than it. There's a difference. He looked at me with something I was beginning to identify, not quite pride, which seemed like the wrong word, too parental, too possessive. Something more like recognition, as if he were watching a thing unfold that he had correctly predicted would unfold but was no less pleased to see. Write that down, he said, the distinction, exactly the way you just said it. I wrote it in the notebook that night, in the small, careful Orcish that I was developing as my preferred writing language even for standard Terran concepts, the distinction between grief getting easier and the person getting bigger. I wrote my mother's name next to it. I wrote the name of the uncle she had lost, which she had told me once and which I had remembered because she only said it once, as if it were a rare thing to be spent carefully. I wrote fixed points. The other girls in my room had complicated opinions about this arrangement. "Is he your guardian?" asked Preth, one of the orc girls on about the third week. "Not officially," I said. "Then what is he?" I thought about the categories. They didn't quite fit. He was not family, not in any framework I had been taught. He was not a social worker. He was not a father, though there was something in the steadiness of him that occupied a similar gravitational space. "He is someone who does the right thing even when no one is watching," I said. Preth looked at me like this was a very strange answer. It was the most accurate one I had. The contact came from Goran Secundus, 11 weeks after the storm. A representative of the Bloodfang clan on Secundus. A distant cousin of my mother's named Veth Bloodfang. No relation to the Veth species in my room, Bloodfang being a widespread clan name. Arrived at the transitional center with documentation, and the kind of energy of someone who has traveled far and feels inconvenienced about it. He was not unkind. He was orc, middle-aged, with properly polished tusks and the heavy professional bearing of a clan administrator. He sat across from me and explained, efficiently, that my father's family, who I apparently had somewhere, a fact I had always known abstractly but never needed to engage with practically, was willing to assume custodial responsibility, and that I would be relocated to Goran Secundus within the month. I said, "All right." He said, "There will be some adjustment, of course, but the clan's resources are." I said, "All right," I said, "I understand." He looked at me with faint surprise. I think he had expected more resistance from a recently orphaned 9-year-old, and he was not wrong to expect it, but I had spent 11 weeks in the quiet practice of accepting necessary things, and this was a necessary thing. "You have been managed very competently," he said, which I understood was a compliment. I told him I would need to say goodbye to some people. I told Marcus at our next visit. He already knew, in the way that he had learned the shape of things before they were officially announced. I still do not know how he did this, whether it was a skill from his military training or simply his nature, but he had a quiet awareness of what was in motion around him that was, I later learned, very characteristic of certain kinds of soldiers who have done field work. "Secundus," he said. "Yes." "That's a good world," he said. "Better gravity than here actually, better sky." I looked at him. "You've been there." "Transit survey couple years ago, before this posting." He leaned back. "We were in the courtyard, the weather having turned warm, which on Gorund Prime meant the thermal winds had settled, and the sky had gone from its usual brownish haze to a thin, clear blue. "It's a good world," he said again, with the specific weight of someone saying something twice because they mean it more than the words sound. "I'm not afraid of it," I said. "I know." "I'm afraid of forgetting," I said, and then stopped because I had not meant to say that, and now that I had said it I had to follow it through. My mother's voice, I can still hear it clearly right now, but I know I read that memory changes, that you don't remember, you remember the last time you remembered, and each time it changes a little, and eventually. "You can write it down," Marcus said. "Everything you can remember." The exact way she said things, specific phrases, the more specific the better. I looked at him. "It doesn't stop the process entirely," he said, "but it anchors things. Something written down becomes a fixed point. You can always go back to the fixed point." He picked up a small piece of debris from the courtyard, turned it over in his hands, habit, I had noticed, a way of occupying his hands when he was thinking. "My father died when I was 11. I have a notebook that I wrote in for the first year after, specific things, the way he took his coffee. The joke he always made about his own bad singing. Some of it I have not read in 20 years, but it's there, fixed. I was quiet. "I'll give you a notebook," he said. "Before you go." "A paper notebook." "Paper lasts longer than data," he said. "Also, the act of writing by hand is different. Something about it," he paused. "Different parts of the brain, more connected to memory, I think. I'm not a scientist, so don't hold me to that." "You are not a scientist," I agreed, "but you know a lot of useful things." "Field experience," he said, with the slight embarrassment of someone unused to being credited for their knowledge. "You pick things up." The month before I left was busy in the way that transitions are busy: documentation and medical checks, and the transfer of custodial authority, and the complex logistical coordination between Gorund Prime and Secondus that Veth Bloodfang managed with the efficiency of a man who did this regularly. The transitional center had a small farewell gathering for me, which I found both touching and awkward, as I had not become close to many of the staff. Preth, my roommate, cried, which surprised me. I had thought of us as cohabitants rather than friends, but apparently she had thought differently. I found, in the week before departure, that I had a great deal of thinking to do and very little language for it. The thinking was, what is the name of the thing that Marcus is to me, and what is the name of the thing I am to him? I had been turning this over for months. He was not family. He was not a social worker. He was not in any category that my 9-year-old taxonomy had prepared me for. But I had also, in my mother's tradition, learned that categories were less important than function. "What does it do?" she would have asked, not "what is it called?" What Marcus did, he found me. He stayed. He learned the shape of what I needed and supplied it without fanfare and without requiring me to perform gratitude or healing or adjustment at a speed that was not natural. When I was quiet, he was quiet. When I wanted to learn things, he taught me. When I was angry about my situation, which happened, periodic waves of it, the kind of anger that has nowhere specific to aim and so spreads across everything, he did not try to argue me out of it or comfort me past it, only stayed present and let it move through. What am I to him? That was harder. I asked him once directly, "What is this?" meaning I thought everything. He considered it with the seriousness he gave everything. "I'm not sure there's a word," he said, "in my language or yours." "There should be one. There should be a lot of words that don't exist yet," he said. "Language is always catching up to experience." "Then let me ask differently. What do I mean to you?" A longer pause. We were in the common room, late afternoon, the light going amber through the scratched windows. "When I found you," he said finally, "you were the third day and you were very still. That kind of still that is past panic and into something harder. And you looked at me, you looked at my hand for a long time. I knew you were calculating. I knew you were deciding." He stopped. "Most adults I've met in bad situations want to be saved. They're ready to be helped before they've decided if you're trustworthy. You made me earn it first." I thought about that. "I took your hand," I said. "You took my hand," he agreed. And I thought, this is the most alive thing I've ever seen in the middle of the worst circumstances I've ever seen. And I thought, he paused again, and this time the pause had something in it that I had not seen before from him, a kind of reaching for words that he normally kept efficiently in hand. "I thought that I would like to see what she becomes." I was quiet. "I still think that," he said. "I'll still be thinking it when you're on Secondus and I'm wherever the unit is next." "You're not staying on Gorund Prime." "Probably not. The survey contract extends another 2 months and then we're being rotated." He looked at his hands. "I've put in a request for Secondus as a follow-on posting. I can't promise it'll be approved." I looked at him. "You put in a request," I said slowly. "The infrastructure survey program operates on a 12-world circuit. Secondus is on the circuit. It's a reasonable request." He was still looking at his hands. "It was approved this morning, actually. I was going to tell you." I was 9 years old and I had lost everything, and I was going to a new world with distant family I did not know, and a future that was entirely unmapped. And the person who had been the fixed point through all of it had just told me he would be on the same world. "Marcus," I said. "Vreth," he said. "I hate that I am going to cry." "You don't have to not cry," he said. "There's no rule." There was not. So I did not cry, and he sat with me while I did, and afterward he gave me the notebook, paper, soft gray cover, the size to fit in a pocket, and told me to start writing that night. Goran Secundus was, as Marcus had said, a better world. I did not understand this immediately. I was 10 years old when I arrived, still new to loss, still learning the architecture of absence, and I was not in a state to appreciate atmospheric quality or gravitational comfort. I arrived in the custody of Veth Bloodfang, who turned out to be a decent person once you got past the administrator's carapace, and I was delivered to the household of my father's cousin, a large-tusked woman named Gara Bloodfang, who had 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren, and a house full of deliberate noise. I did not know my father. This was a fact I had grown up with and had never had reason to examine closely. My parents had separated before I was born, a common enough arrangement in Keth culture, where the clan was the primary unit of belonging rather than the household, and my father's family was simply Clan Bloodfang on another world, names in documents, people I had been assured existed without ever needing to engage with their existence. Now here I was in their house. Gara was not my mother. She knew this and I knew this, and we both knew that each of us knew it, and this shared knowledge turned out to be the most useful foundation we could have had. She did not try to be my mother. She did not try to fill the space. She offered me a room and meals and the structure of a household, and she left the rest to me. Her grandchildren, Peth and Lore, 7 and 5, were desperately curious about me in the way of young children who have not yet learned to moderate their curiosity, and they asked me questions with the rapid-fire intensity of small creatures who have limited attention spans and want answers immediately. "Why don't you have more tusk?" Peth asked, examining my face with anthropological frankness. I was small-tusked for my age, vestigial really, a trait I had apparently inherited from my father's side. "Genetics," I said. "What does genetics mean?" "It means things come from your family, and you didn't choose them." Peth considered this, like how Lore has big ears. "Exactly like that." Lore, who had not been paying attention, said, "I have good ears," with complete confidence, and went back to whatever he was doing. I found in Gara's house that children were easier than adults. Children did not look at me with that particular quality of sympathy that adults had perfected, the look that said I know what happened to you and I am performing appropriate feeling about it. Children looked at me with simple curiosity and simple expectation. I was a new person, I was interesting, what could I do? I taught Peth and Lore 3 games my mother had taught me. I told them when they asked that the games came from my mother. I told them when they asked further that my mother was dead. They looked solemn for exactly as long as was natural for them, and then asked if I would teach them another game, and I said yes. My mother would have liked that. Marcus's first letter arrived 2 months after I reached Secundus. It was a paper letter, handwritten, which was extremely unusual. Most people communicated through data systems, and the idea of handwriting a letter and sending it through the physical post was so archaic that Gara's household took several days to even identify what the package was. The letter was in standard Terran with Orcish translations of words he wasn't sure I knew yet, written in the margins in his careful, slightly architectural handwriting. He wrote, I noticed, the way an engineer draws, with clear intention and no wasted marks. It was 4 pages long. It described, in detail, the geology of a valley system northeast of the main survey corridor on Gorand Prime that he had spent a week mapping. It described field conditions and equipment challenges, and a particular type of crystalline rock formation that appeared every 600 meters, and that the geologists on his team were arguing about. It described the cook's questionable approach to field rations. At the end, on the 4th page, he wrote, "The survey is wrapping up in 6 weeks. The request for secondus was approved. I'll send details when I know the timeline. I hope Gara's household is loud enough. You mentioned once you weren't used to quiet." I read the letter 3 times. Then I wrote back, 8 pages, in Orcish with standard Terran margin translations, about the school and the house and Peth and lore and the sky on Secondus, which Marcus had said was better, and which was, in fact, a more saturated blue than Gorund Prime's haze-filtered light. I wrote, "You were right about the sky." He wrote back, "I usually am about skies. It's one of the few things." The first time I saw him on Secondus, I was in the market near the transit hub, with Gara, picking up supplies for the household dinner. He was across the market at a stall that sold survey equipment, looking at something the vendor was showing him, wearing civilian clothes. He was almost never in uniform off-duty, another thing I had come to know about him, and he looked completely different from the context of Gorund Prime and completely the same. I said, "Marcus." He looked up. He saw me. His face did the thing it did, not a large expression, not dramatic, not the performance of reunion, just a specific quality of becoming more present, the way a light that was already on gets a little brighter. He crossed the market. I was 10 and I had not seen him in 4 months, and I was standing next to Gara, who had heard many things about him but never met him, and I did not know the protocol for any of this. I said, "This is Gara Bloodfang. This is Marcus Cole." Gara looked at him with the frank assessment of an orc matriarch who has been running a household for 40 years and can place most people in 10 seconds. Whatever she placed him as, she seemed, after the 10 seconds, to find it satisfactory. "You came south," she said in the trade tongue. He looked faintly startled. I had told her the story clearly, and then he said, "Yes." "Good," she said, with the bluntness of someone who considers this the whole of the required commentary, and went back to the produce stall. Marcus looked at me. "She approves," I told him. "I could tell," he said. "How?" She didn't say anything else. If she didn't approve, she would have had questions. 7 years later, I was 16 and studying at the Keth Bloodfang Academy on Secondus, which was a real school with a real curriculum and teachers who expected real things from me, and I was better at standard Terran than Marcus was at Orcish, though neither of us had stopped learning. Marcus's unit had been on Secondus for 5 of those 7 years. He had been promoted, reluctantly, he said, as if rank were a slight inconvenience someone had arranged for him, and his survey work had expanded to include something called structural xenoarchaeology, which meant that he now spent a considerable amount of time in old ruins explaining to other humans why they should not touch things. We had dinner once a week at the same restaurant near the transit hub, a small place run by a Veth family, not the species, the name, that made a remarkable soup. We had been doing this for so long that the Veth family no longer asked what we wanted, but simply brought it. I told him, one evening over the soup, that I had been accepted to the university preliminary program, engineering track. He looked at me across the small table with the light eyes that I knew better now than I knew most faces, and he said, "She was right then." "Who was?" "Your mother, fine-boned hands, good for detailed work. She was right." I looked down at my hands, which had grown, though they were still finer boned than average for orc. They were hands that had, in 7 years, learned to draft structural schematics and calibrate survey equipment and write, in small careful letters, in a soft gray notebook that was nearly full. "I started a second notebook," I said. "I have filled the first one." "What did you do with it?" "It's in my room, on the shelf above my desk." I looked at the soup bowl, at the small carved animal I had taken out of my pocket and set on the table as I always did at this restaurant, a habit I had never examined closely enough to explain. I read it sometimes. She sounds the way I remember her. Good, he said. It was the whole sentence. Marcus. Vreth. When I told Preth that you were someone who does the right thing even when no one is watching. I remember you telling me about that. I have been thinking for 7 years that this is what you are. I met his eyes, but I've been wrong about the framing. He waited. You are not someone who does the right thing when no one is watching, I said. You are someone who cannot tell the difference between watched and unwatched. To you it is all the same. There is just the thing in front of you and whether it is the right thing to do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think that's a more generous interpretation than is accurate. You went south when the order was to hold north. I was restless. You stayed on Gorand Prime for 11 weeks past the official search closure. The survey work was there. You requested a posting to Secondus. Reasonable career move. The xenoarchaeology resources here are. Marcus. He stopped. You promised, I said, a 9-year-old child in a rubble pile that you would not tell anyone her mother was dead, and you kept it, for as long as she needed you to keep it. He looked at the table. That was a small thing, he said. It was not a small thing, I said. It was exactly the right size of the thing. He picked up the carved bear, took it from the table between 2 fingers, turned it in the light the way he did with small debris, the way he always did with things he was thinking about. You know, he said, in human cultures, there are words for different kinds of found family. There are words for guardians and mentors and... I know the human words, I said. I know the orcish ones too. None of them quite fit this. No, I agreed, they don't. Language is catching up to experience, he said, which was what he had said 7 years ago and which I had written in the gray notebook on the first night before anything else. It is, I said. But I think in the meantime, Marcus and Vreth are enough. He set the bear back on the table between the 2 soup bowls, in the center, equidistant, which was not something he did intentionally. It was just where his hand put it. Yeah, he said, I think so too. There was a thing that happened in my 14th year that I have not told many people. It was a small thing in the sense that no disaster occurred and no one was harmed and life continued forward as lives do. But it was the kind of small thing that reveals the shape of a larger thing, the way a crack in a wall reveals the structure behind the plaster. I was 14 and Peth was 11 and Lore was 9 and we were, by that point, something that I still did not have precise language for, not siblings, not quite, but something in the vicinity, the way that proximity and shared meals and the trading of small secrets accumulates into a form of belonging that does not require a formal category. I had lived in Gara's household for 4 years. I knew where everything was kept, and I knew the rhythm of the house, and I knew that Lore could be talked out of any bad mood by asking him to explain his current project, and I knew that Peth was afraid of the dark, but considered this deeply embarrassing, and would not admit it to anyone except me. That year Gara had a falling out with her eldest son, Drev, over something to do with clan resource allocation. The details were adult and complicated, and I understood them only partially. The important thing was that Drev stopped coming to the household dinners for 3 months, and the household, which had been loud, became quieter in a way that felt like a held breath. I noticed that Peth and Lore were afraid in a way they couldn't name. Not afraid of Gara, she was steady, always, but afraid of the concept, the way families could crack along lines you didn't know were there. Peth started coming to my room more. Lore started finishing his dinner faster, as if leaving the table before things could change. I remembered being 9 in a portable shelter on a broken world. I told them what I could. I told them, One evening when all three of us were in my room ostensibly working on schoolwork but actually not working on schoolwork, that the things we are afraid of losing are the things we are most sure we have. Peth looked at me. What does that mean? It means, I said carefully, that you are afraid because you know what this is. You know what it feels like when Drev comes to dinner, and you know what the house sounds like when it's all 7 of us, and you know how good that is, and now you're afraid of losing it. That's worse, Lore said, with the bluntness of 9 years old. Knowing what it is makes it more scary, not less. For now, I said, but the knowing is also what lets you do something about it. If you didn't know what it was, you couldn't protect it. Peth was quiet. Then, did someone teach you that? I thought about my mother who had said it about broken things. I thought about Marcus, who had said you're the most alive thing I've seen in the worst circumstances I've seen. I thought about the gray notebook, nearly full by then, full of fixed points. Several people, I said, and some of it I worked out on my own. Drev came back to the dinners 6 weeks later. The falling out resolved, not perfectly. These things never resolve perfectly, but well enough. The house was loud again. Peth never said anything about that conversation to me afterward. Lore did once 2 years later out of nowhere, while we were waiting for transit, he said, knowing what it is, and looked at me as if this were a complete sentence, which for him it was. I nodded. He nodded back. I wrote it in the notebook that night, the whole conversation, the details of the room and the schoolwork we weren't doing and the quality of the evening light, because details are what fix things. Marcus taught me something, in the year I was 15, that he said came from his survey training, but that I have since understood as a principle that applies to most of life. We were out in the field. He had begun bringing me along on weekend survey excursions when the terrain was suitable, with Gara's full approval, because he said the best way to learn structural assessment was to look at things in context. And we were examining an old cliff face, northeast of the city, that showed something unusual in its strata, a dark band at about 4 meters height that suggested a significant atmospheric event several thousand years prior. He said, when you are trying to understand something you cannot see directly, you look for what it left behind. The cliff face couldn't show you the ancient storm, but it showed you the storm's signature. The dark band was the storm, in everything but the moment. It works for everything, I asked. Most things, he said. People. He looked at the cliff face. People too. What someone leaves behind in the world and the people around them, that's the record, that's the signature. He used a small sensor to take a reading of the dark layer. It doesn't fade, it sediments. I stood in the field on a good world with a blue sky, thinking about signatures. My mother, who fixed things and polished her tusks and said that grief gets lighter because you get stronger, who had hands like the right tool for the job, and who had been taken from the world at morning shift departure time, in a thermal shockwave that the Emergency Bureau had not predicted would reach that far south. Her signature was everywhere, in the games I had taught Peth and Lore, in the distinction I made between grief getting easier and grief getting lighter, in the notebook, page after page, in the way I had taken a human soldier's hand after a long and careful assessment and decided he was trustworthy. She had been right about that too. Marcus, I said. Vreth. Thank you for going south. He was quiet for a moment, reading the sensor display. Then he said, thank you for waiting. The sky was the right blue. The field was warm. The cliff face held its record of ancient weather with the patience of stone, saying, this happened, this was real, it mattered, I am still here. The notebook is full now. I have started a third. On the first page of the third one, I wrote what my mother said. The best thing you can know about any broken thing is that it worked once, which means it can work again. I wrote it because it is true, and because she was right about most things, and because fixed points matter. I wrote it also because of what I have learned. in the years since a human soldier came south when the order was to hold north, that she did not say explicitly but that her whole life demonstrated. The right person at the right moment is not luck. It is someone paying attention when no one has told them to. It is someone who cannot tell the difference between watched and unwatched. It is someone who goes south. I am going to be an engineer. I am going to build things that work, and when they break, I am going to open them up and understand them, and then I am going to fix them. My mother's hands, my mother's way of seeing. One human soldier's stubborn, unauthorized, deeply inconvenient sense of direction. I have not forgotten anything. I do not intend to. End.